beginning of the Hijri year. So congratulations and many happy returns. And no better way to celebrate it than going on remembering the Prophet and his life. And today I am starting the 7th year of Hijrah. And as you remember, after the Battle of the Ditch, the Prophet ﷺ expected that he would be safe in Medina for some time because the Quraysh had to go back almost disbanded without having the opportunity to invade Medina or even to fight. And yet the Prophet ﷺ didn't see fit to leave Quraysh alone. He had the idea of still engaging them and approaching them, although in a peaceful way. And so he decided to go for the pilgrimage on that year. And with 1,400 people amongst the Muslims, in the garb of ihram and with no weapons except the swords that was a must for every traveler, they marched together with the sacrificial animals that they would be slaughtering as part of the ritual of Hajj. And the Quraysh got the news that the Muslims are coming. And they were really horrified. And they tried to dissuade the Prophet. They gathered an army under the leadership of Khalid ibn al-Walid, who was still amongst the Kafirs at the time. And the Muslims avoided that army and took another way. And the Quraysh sent emissaries in order to dissuade Muhammad from going into Mecca. And they thought that if he went into Mecca, it would be scandalizing them in the eyes of the rest of the Arabs of the peninsula. So they were well decided, and they sent one delegation, then another delegation without avail. And then the Prophet thought of sending a delegate to them to negotiate with them and to convince them that we are coming for no war, we are coming for worship. We are coming to honor the very house that you also honor, because it is the house of Abraham. And he wanted to send Omar ibn al-Khattab, but Omar told him, I don't have a family in Mecca anymore, and they might harm me because I'll be so solitary and lonely. And they decided to send Uthman ibn Affan, who was one of the best of the Muslims and who was the son-in-law of the Prophet. And he had part of his family in Mecca who would protect him if need arises. Uthman had many friends. They felt very friendly with him. And they even offered him, come and do tawaf around the Kaaba. But Uthman said, no, I cannot do tawaf while the Prophet is being prevented from it. And of course, I'll not do that. It so happened that the negotiations took some time. And so it was rumored amongst the Muslims that they killed Uthman, the emissary of the Prophet. And with that news, it looked like the mission wouldn't be as peaceful as they intended to be, and that if really they killed Uthman, there might be war. And so the Prophet wanted to make sure of his people, whom he invited to pilgrimage, not to war. And they were very forthcoming and very supportive, and they gave their pledge, again, the bay'ah, that is called the Bay'atul Ridwan, that wherever you go, whatever you do, we are with you. In peace, we are with you. In war, we are with you. And that was the bay'ah, the pledge mentioned in the Quran when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, لَقَدْ رَضِيَ اللَّهُ عَنِ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ إِذْ يُبَايِعُونَكَ تَحْتَ الشَّجَرَةِ فَعَلِمَ مَا فِي قُلُوبِهِمْ فَأَنزَلَ السَّكِينَةَ عَلَيْهِمْ وَأَثَابَهُمْ فَتْحًا قَرِيبًا. Allah is pleased with the mu'mins as they give their pledge at the sight of the tree. He knew what was in their hearts, and He led tranquility over them, and He decreed that they will be rewarded with a great victory. And they came back, Uthman came back, and so it was obvious that there would be no need for war. And although Uthman tried to emphasize coming for worship, we don't come for war, etc., yet the Quraysh sent another delegation in order to make any compromise, but the Muslims would not enter Mecca that year. They thought it would be very detrimental to their reputation amongst the Arabs. And at last some compromise was done, and there was a treaty entailing that the Muslims would not go to Umrah or Hajj that year. They will just go back. And that there will be no war between the Quraysh and the Muslims for 10 years. And that if anyone in Mecca with the Quraysh converted to Islam and went to Medina, to the Prophet, the Muslims would return him back to Mecca, to the Quraysh. On the other hand, if a Muslim apostatized and became kafir again and went to Quraysh, they wouldn't send him back to Muhammad. See the imbalance. If one of us becomes a Muslim and goes to you, you return him back to us. If one of your people becomes a kafir and joins us, we're not returning him to you. But the Prophet, of course, knew that if amongst the Muslims reverted to Jahiliyyah, to become a kafir, then Muslims have no need for him. And then that this pledge is open. Whoever amongst the other tribes who were not Muslims wants to take the side of Muhammad in that pledge, they were free to, with no war, and they are in the pledge of Muhammad, and any of the tribes who would side Quraysh would side with them, and the criteria of the treaty would apply to them. And when the treaty was about to be written, the Prophet ﷺ dictated to Ali ibn Abi Talib, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, and the Quraysh delegate said, stop, veto. I don't know ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Say just Bismillah. And the Prophet said, well, write Bismillah. Then the Prophet dictated, this is the treaty between Muhammad, Rasulullah, and the Quraysh. Veto, you are not Rasulullah. Just say Muhammad, the son of Abdullah. And the Prophet said, all right, from Muhammad, the son of Abdullah, and he dictated the rest of the treaty. As a matter of fact, the Muslims felt very uncomfortable. They were 1,400 people, and although they carried only the swords, they could fight their way into Mecca easily. And the dignity and the pride arose in some heads, including such notable people as Umar ibn al-Khattab, who went to Abu Bakr and said, is he not the Prophet? Are we not the Muslims? How come we accept to be so humiliated? Abu Bakr was always wiser. And he said, well, Umar, he is the Prophet of God and the Messenger of God, and he knows what he's doing, and I have to obey him. Yet the Umar wasn't satisfied with that. He was quite a hot man. He went to the Prophet. Are you not the Prophet? Yes, I am. Are we not the mu'mins? Yes, we are. How come we accept the humiliation? And he said, Omar, I am the messenger of Allah. He inspires me what to do, and he will never beat me. Upon which Omar, of course, quietened down. But many of the Muslims were still furious about it. And they went to Umrah, and although they didn't achieve doing the rituals of the Umrah, yet they came with the intention, and they had the sacrificial sheep with them. And if they just slaughtered and removed the ihram and donned their ordinary clothing, this will conclude a Umrah for them. And yet many of the Muslims wouldn't do that. There was a little rebellion out of agony, and the Prophet felt very sad about it. He consulted his wife, Salama, who was with him on that journey. Now I would like to remember to you that some Muslims fake a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. Check that, consult them, women, but don't do as they tell you. شاوروهن وخالفوهن. No, it wasn't the case with the Prophet ﷺ. Salama, his wife, gave the sound advice and he obeyed it. She said, just go silently and slaughter your sheep and have your hair cut and see what is going to happen. And the Prophet, upon her advice, does that. And when the Muslims see their Prophet doing that, they all went and slaughtered their sheep and had their hair cut. During that period, the Treaty of Hudaybiyah was the place, some juridical rules were decreed. Because the Quran revealed that there is exception from you having to return the people who accept Islam to the Kafirs. And that exception was the women. Whoever Muslim woman was under a Kafir husband, or any woman who embraced Islam in Mecca, who manages to go to Medina to the Muslims, would not be returned. And that was an exception from the terms of the treaty. And it decreed that the Muslim woman cannot be the wife of a non-Muslim man. That was at Hudaybiyah that this was decreed. Of course, originally the verse of the Quran that emphasizes this: you believers, if you receive the mu'min women emigrating to you, make sure they are know Islam and are serious about their faith. And if you make sure that they are real mu'min, do not return them back to the Kafirs. And then in the same verse it says, وَلَا تُمْسِكُوا بِعَصَمِ الْكَوَافِرِ, which means that also a Muslim man should not marry a non-Muslim woman. That was at Hudaybiyah. Of course, later on, after that, much later on, another exception was done, exempting Muslim men and permitting Muslim men to marry women from the people of the book. So at the beginning it was a total ban. Then there became an exception from the ban that allowed Muslim men to marry women from the people of the book. Not a Hindu, not a Sikh, etc., but a Muslim man could marry a Christian or a Jewess. And the surah says, وَطَعَامُ الَّذِينَ أُوتُوا الْكِتَابَ حِلٌّ لَكُمْ, those people of the book, their food is lawful to you and your food is lawful to them. وَالْمُحْصَنَاتُ مِنَ الْمُؤْمِنَاتِ وَالْمُحْصَنَاتُ مِنَ الَّذِينَ أُوتُوا الْكِتَابَ مِنْ قَبْلِكُمْ. And the chaste women from the Mormons, and the chaste women from the people of the book, that is, the Jews and the Christians, are lawful for Muslims to marry. So it became halal for a Muslim to marry a Christian woman or a Jewish, although this is sometimes, as in our situation, it might not be the best of the halal. Yes, it is an option, but it is not the best option, because we are a minority in the United States, and if a Muslim man would marry a Christian girl, he is lost to the Muslim girl. And because one of the things a Muslim should take to heart when planning a marriage, it is not just the romanticism, because romance is alcohol, romance mind. But one of the things a Muslim man should plan for, he should ask the question, what do I want my children to be? Do I want them to be Muslim? Who can make them Muslim? And the choice of the mother is very important in that. Then another thing that was decreed was the lawfulness of seeking the help of non-Muslims, because at Hudaybiyah, the Prophet was helped by a Muslim man who went to monitor the moves of the other camp and to tell the Prophet about it. Of course, this is not the beginning of such lawfulness. Even during the hijrah of Prophet Muhammad himself, he emigrated with Abu Bakr, and their guide on the hijrah was not a Muslim. And so, when someone is efficient and trustworthy, then we can depend on them. The third thing that was decreed is to accept the advice of a woman, because at the time, Arabs before Islam were not that respectful to women. And after Islam, as we see today, many societies amongst us now are not respectful enough to women, so much so that they just invented a hadith, seek their advice, but do the opposite. Of course, in Hudaybiyah, Salama gave the right advice, and the Prophet obeyed it. Then a thing was decreed, that having a peace with the enemy and having a treaty with the enemy is all right as long as it entails benefit to the Muslims. And so it is circumstantial if at some time during a prolonged battle you see fit that there will be a ceasefire or a peace or a treaty, if this is good for the Muslims. And with that, the Muslims left Hudaybiyah and went back to Medina, and during their way back was revealed the verse that says, "Inna fatahna laka fathan mubina." We have gave you a great victory, and of course time will later on prove that it was really a great victory. It was not a defeat, as some Muslims thought. The treaty was immediately tested, because immediately was signed, a man came running to the Muslim camp. His name was Abu Basir. He was a kafir, he embraced Islam, he was chained, and he could manage to come to the Muslim camp and say, "Save me, my Muslim brothers, save me. If I go back to those people, they'll either torture me and make me kafir again." And that was a real test, because the Prophet was a man of his word. He said, "Abu Basir, you go back. We have signed a treaty and will abide by it. You go back, and Allah, inshallah, will find a solution for you." And Abu Basir said, "Well, I'm going back. Prophet of God, you have kept your promise, okay?" And he went back. And the two people who came to take him back, he could conquer them, those two guards. And he escaped. But he did not go back to the camp of the Prophet or Medina with other Muslims. He went to the desert and took it upon himself to interrupt and interfere the caravans of the Quraysh. And this encouraged other Muslims in Mecca and the people who embraced Islam in Mecca to flee Mecca not to go to the Medina to the Muslims, because it was incumbent on the Prophet to send them back. But they went and they joined Abu Basir in being an obstacle and a nuisance to the Quraysh and their caravans, so much so that it was Quraysh itself that requested the Prophet to cancel that term. After that, the Prophet sent some of the a few campaigns, small campaigns, in one of which a man was captured who is Abu al-As ibn Rabi'a, who was the husband of the Prophet's daughter. But he wasn't Muslim, and therefore he couldn't come back as a husband. And Zainab was in Medina. But he asked her just to give him her immunity, her protection. And he went and he told the Prophet, I have merchandise and animals that belong to the Quraysh, and I don't want to look as I betrayed them. Would you please set me free until I give the dues to their owners in Mecca? And the Prophet did that, and he went and returned the things to their owners and set off to Medina, this time as a Muslim. And he joined his wife again. And it is significant because he joined his wife without a new marriage contract. During the original marriage contract, although it was done in the time before Islam, was still a valid marriage contract. At the time also, the Prophet started to extend the da'wah to some of the kings and the chiefs in the area, and some of them responded favorably, some of them responded very unfavorably. He sent it to Hercules, the king of the Romans, and at the time Abu Sufyan, head of the Quraysh, was caravanning there, and Hercules asked him about Muhammad. Who is he? Is he an honorable person? Yes. Is he of good descent? Yes. Is he honest? Yes. Did he have one of his fathers as a king? No. Who followed him, the poor or the rich? The poor, etc., etc. And after this, the Roman king commented, this is a prophet. He is not a man of ambition, a worldly gain. This is a prophet. And he entertained the idea of becoming a Muslim, but his followers grumbled, and instead of losing his throne, he decided to lose Islam, and so on. He sent it to Khosrow, the king of Persia, but the king of Persia killed the envoy and tore the letter, and the Prophet, upon knowing that, said, may Allah tear his kingdom. He sent it to Muqawqis of Egypt, the king of the Copts, and embrace Islam, or else you bear responsibility for all the Copts. And the man was wise enough. He didn't accept Islam, but he sent a nice letter and sent a horse and sent Mary, the maid who later on bore the son of the Prophet Ibrahim. He sent to the Mundar ibn Sawi in Bahrain, who became Muslim and accepted Islam. And he sent to the two princes of Oman. He sent Amr ibn al-As, and after long negotiations, they accepted Islam. Then there was the small skirmishes again after the Battle of Khaybar. You know that the Prophet went and opened Khaybar after Hudaybiyah. Almost immediately, just a few weeks after Hudaybiyah and coming back, he knew that the Jews of Khaybar were plotting against him and were joining other Arabs and recruiting other Arabs. And of course, you know, their betrayal, the high treason, as a matter of fact, during the blockade of the siege of Medina, when there was an agreement that when there was battle, then the Jews would allow the Quraysh to enter Medina from the quarters they were supposed to protect. It was high treason. And therefore, as soon as the Prophet concluded Hudaybiyah, he ordered a campaign against Khaybar, the Jews of Khaybar. He went and camped between the Jews of Khaybar and their ally, the tribe of Ghatafan, in order to separate the two allies. And he went somebody to skirmish with Ghatafan. So when the Ghatafanis in Khaybar with the Jews would hear that their headquarters, their capital is being attacked, and so they left the Jews and went back. And he sent Ali ibn Abi Talib to attack the Khaybar castles of the Jews. On the eve, he said, I'll give the flag of leadership to a man who loves Allah and the Prophet and whom Allah and the Prophet love. And everybody was ambitious, including notable Sahaba like Umar. And in the morning, the flag was given to Ali ibn Abi Talib. And the Prophet told him at the beginning, first thing, invite them to Islam, because if Allah guides one person by you, it is better to you than all the world. And they started attacking, but the people were very cunning. They had a number of fortresses, and they kept retreating from one forest to another until they went to the last and the strongest. And at that time, one of the Jewish people came to know about Islam and became a Muslim. And he went to the Prophet and told them these people have tunnels underground to lead them to the water sources, to the wells. And he told the Prophet about those, and the Prophet could take the water resources, after which the people surrendered. And the Prophet accepted that they go out with carrying nothing at all, just their personal effects. And the cattle and the horses they were riding, but to take none of the treasures and of the arms. But he warned them, if you betray, then this agreement is null. And soon they discovered that a man called Abu al-Haqiq had various sacks of gold that he hid in a certain place, and this was discovered, and Abu al-Haqiq was sentenced to death, and the booty was distributed, 1/10 for the state and the other for the men and women who are the army. For a man, 1 portion, for a horse, 1 portion, for a infantry, 1 portion, and there were 6 women in that battle, and they also had their shares. Then they negotiated, and the Prophet accepted that they may stay in their land, but this would no more be their land. It is now Muslims' lands. But if you want to come and cultivate your land, and we share the harvest, then you are allowed to do that. And they were also warned that any time the Muslims see fit that you leave the land and go, the Muslims have the right to expel you from the land. And they stayed upon that agreement. Also, after that campaign, the Prophet married Safiya, the daughter of Huyay ibn Akhtab. He was one of the great leaders of the Jews. And then he found that after the battle, they were all captured, and one of the Muslims, Hassan ibn Thabit, took her and her sister to the camps of the Muslims, but on the way he went in between the dead bodies of the Jews. And when he arrived, the Prophet rebuked him. Are you so cruel? Don't you have mercy in your heart? You take the two girls and let them pass and see the bodies of their dead. But the Prophet offered her to marry, proposed to her. And she accepted Islam, and she told him that I accepted Islam even before that because at home I overheard my father and my uncle, and the father asking him, are you sure he is the one? And he would say, yes, I am sure he is the one. And this was the description of the Prophet that the Jews expected, and she knew that they admitted it, he was the Prophet, but it was just the pride and arrogance that made them refuse Islam. Safiya later on used to be scolded by the other wives of the Prophet because they asked her, who is your father? And the answer, my father was a Jew. But she complained to the Prophet, and the Prophet told her, tell them my father is Moses and my husband is Muhammad. Who amongst you has this honor? And so he gave her the proper answer. At the time also, the Jews of Fadak also surrendered without fight. The Jews of Wadi al-Qira also surrendered after some fighting. And during Khaybar also the emigres to Abyssinia returned. They heard about the Islamic victories and that it was safe for them to return, and they were back and joined the Prophet at Medina, headed by Ja'far ibn Abu Talib, the brother of Ali ibn Abi Talib. And the Prophet was so pleased, and he said, I don't know with which I am more pleased, with the conquest of Khaybar or with the return of Ja'far and his friends. In Tayma, the Jews surrendered without fight and accepted the same terms. We stay in the land, we cultivate the land, we split the harvest. Later on in the time of Umar ibn al-Khattab, upon a hadith of the Prophet, Umar expelled, dismissed all the Jews except those of Tayma, because they were just on the outskirts of the Arab Peninsula, and there was a saying of the Prophet that no two religions would be together in the Arab Peninsula. In Khaybar, some juridical rules were revealed and decreed, including the ban on eating donkey meat, the ban on eating the meat of carnivorous animals, the ban of cohabiting the captured women slaves if they are pregnant. And there's the hadith of the Prophet, let no one of you shed his water on the cultivation by another person. And it became the rule that even if she is captured, then you have to wait until she gives. The division and apportioning of the booty, 1/5 and 4/5. Honesty with the enemies, because a man came to the Prophet with a flock of sheep and he said, I want to become a Muslim, but these sheep belong to the Jews. And the Prophet allowed him to go and return the sheep and come back. Also at that time was decreed the qada of salah. You know, when you miss the salah and you do it again after the time. So it happened that the Prophet was very tired. He overslept until the sun rose. And so he missed the time of the morning prayer, and he repeated it. And then it was decreed that if you miss a prayer, then you repeat it, which is called qada, either single or jama'ah in a group prayer. Another thing was repeating the ban over zawaj al-mut'ah. What is zawaj al-mut'ah? Technically, literally translated, the marriage of enjoyment. And this was a habit in the Jahiliyyah. Islam never decreed it, the Prophet never decreed it. But reported are 5 times when the Prophet banned the zawaj al-mut'ah. What does it entail? The woman would say to the man, I give you myself in enjoyment for the period of 2 months, 2 hours, whatever. And for the sum of money of that, an amount of money. And this, of course, it's a sensitive point because some of our brethren, the Shia, still believe that it is lawful to do zawaj al-mut'ah. But very notable imams of the Shia are against it. Ali ibn Abi Talib, who is the greatest person after the Prophet to the Shia, said it is banned, it is adultery. And the Ja'far al-Sadiq, who is one of the greatest imams of the Shia, said it is adultery. And it is not marriage, it forfeits the purpose of marriage, that is forming the unit of humanity and the proper unison by intent for eternity. And it is not a lawful marriage. It also differs from marriage not only by being without a marriage contract, it is without a marriage contract, and it is limited by a period of time. And when one of them died, there will be no inheritance, because they are not husband and wife, they are mut'ah. And when the husband dies, then the iddah, the waiting period for the woman, is only 45 days. And there is no divorce in the mut'ah, because a man divorces his wife. But in mut'ah they are not husband and wife, and therefore no divorce. And the Quran says, وَالَّذِينَ هُمْ لِفُرُوجِهِمْ حَافِظُونَ لا على أزواجهم أو ما ملكت أيمانهم فإنهم غير ملومين فمن ابتغى وراء ذلك فأولئك هم العادون. The Quran describing the moments, various descriptions, various features, including keeping their chastity, unless with their wives or the possessions of the right hand, the captives from war, and whoever seeks sex beyond that, it is a transgression. Therefore, there is no Islamic basis for mut'ah. Then also the decree of the jizya, as the Prophet did, and the jizya is to be collected. It is, you are in our alliance, but in lieu of joining our army, you are exempted from joining the army, but you have to pay a tax which is called jizya tax. Then the rulings of Ahl al-Dhimma. You are not Muslims, and whether you are Christian, Jew, or otherwise, the Majus, etc., would be in the protection of the Muslims in lieu of being good citizens, not betraying the Muslims. Then the Prophet sent a few campaigns. In one of them, Abu Bakr was the leader, and one of the captives was a girl, and the Prophet took her from Abu Bakr, sent her to Mecca in order to set free some of the Muslim captives there. One of them, during one of them, Osama ibn Zayd was the leader, and during the battle he was fighting one of the Kafirs, and the sword of the man fell down. And Zayd ibn Thabit, of course, raised, and at the last moment the man said, La ilaha illallah. And of course he says he's going to fool me and kill him. But the Prophet rebuked him and said, did you open his heart to know whether he was sincere or not? So if someone says La ilaha illallah to us, he's a Muslim. What is in his heart we cannot know, and only Allah knows. Then came the Umrah al-Qada. You know, when the prayer, you the time and you do it Qada, the Umrah, the mission of the Prophet to do Umrah, the year passed, and the time came for them to go to Umrah again, and they went to Mecca, and the Quraysh fled the city and stood watching at the mountain tops, and they thought that they'll see weak people because malaria was abundant in Medina, and they thought that malaria would exhaust the Muslims. And the Prophet said, Allah will have mercy upon anyone who shows them strength. And so during the tawaf and in certain place during the sa'i, the Muslims would trot like that to show that they are strong. And this became a sunnah after that we all do when we go to the Umrah. The Prophet yet sent an invitation to the Quraysh. I'm inviting you to a meal, come and eat with me. But they refused, because at the time he wanted to show them that Muslims are not the beasts they think they were. They are not coming with wickedness, but they are coming in friendliness, and yet they did not accept the invitation. At the time, Khalid ibn al-Walid became a Muslim. His brother Khalid ibn al-Walid sent him a letter and said, the Prophet asked me, where is Khalid? Someone like him shouldn't be ignorant about Islam. And he went to the Prophet and apologized for what he did to the Muslims beforehand, and the Prophet said, Allahumma ghafir li Khalid, and that was it. Then came the Ghazwa of Mu'tah. The Rome, that's the Byzantine Empire, attacked the Muslims, and so the Prophet sent an army of 3,000 people, giving the leadership to 3 people in succession. If one dies, the next would come after him, and these were Zayd ibn Haritha and Ja'far ibn Abi Talib and Abdullah ibn Rawaha. They went with an army of 3,000, and they found that the Romans came with an army of 200,000. 200,000. It would have been prudent and wise to go back, but you know, sometimes some Muslims feel the pride of Islam, and they went into the battle, and the Romans targeted the chiefs. So they killed the first flag bearer, then they killed the second flag bearer, they killed the third flag bearer. And all those, the 3 named by the Prophet, were all killed. And of course, they were heading for defeat. But someone stepped in, and that was Khalid ibn al-Walid, and he ordered the right side of his army to move left and the left to move right, etc., and gave the view, the scene that there was reinforcements coming, etc., and could make a very successful retreat. very successful retreat. Only 12 Muslims were lost, although so many of the Romans were killed. And in the hand of Khalid, 9 swords were broken. And when they came back to Medina, some of the young people of Medina tarnished them, deserters. But the Prophet said, no, they are not deserters. They are coming to me. And then the battle will continue. And they felt good about it. Then there was the campaign of Dhat al-Salasil for the tribes that helped the Romans, and just a few campaigns after that. And then came the great conquest, al-Fath, the conquest of Mecca. Hudaybiyah was a victory because the number of people who accepted Islam, the 2 years from Hudaybiyah to the conquest of Mecca, was several-fold the number of people who accepted Islam from the beginning of Islam through the 19 preceding years. So that the time has come and Muslims were ready. But Muslims had a treaty and they kept respecting their treaty. Had it not been that some of the tribes that were in the alliance of Quraysh at the tribe that was in the alliance of Muhammad, and they killed them and they chased them even to the Kaaba. And when they said, we are in the house of your gods, and the other leader said, there is no gods today. And so the treaty was broken, not by the Muslims but by the other side. The Quraysh took note, and the cunning man Abu Sufyan went to Medina in order to, he sought the extension of the treaty. Some Muslims saw him and wanted to kill him, but he could manage to go to his daughter, Habiba, who was the wife of the Prophet. And then he was about to sit down, but she removed the bed that he was about to sit down. She told him, this is the bed of Rasulullah. You cannot sit on it. And he said, is it because I'm too good for it, or because it is too good for me? And she said, you are a kafir, you are najas, her father, and you cannot sit here. He went to seek the help of others. He went to Abu Bakr, but Abu Bakr sent him away. To Omar sent him away. To Ali sent him away. To Fatima, the daughter of the Prophet, they sent him away. And then the Muslim army was being ready, and this time it was 12,000 people. And the Prophet prayed, please keep it a secret from the Quraysh. But one of the Muslims, called Hatib ibn Abi Balta'a, had links in Mecca. And so he thought of warning them. And he gave a letter to a woman who was traveling for Mecca. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala inspired the Prophet that something is wrong. So he sent 2 people, including Ali ibn Abi Talib, who could reach the woman before going to Mecca, give us the message. She tried to deny, and he said, I swear by Allah, if you don't get it, I'll tear your clothes bit by bit until I get that letter. And then she gave them the letter. Of course, going back, Hatib felt very embarrassed, and all the people wanted to kill him. High treason, warning the enemy that our forces are coming. Yet the Prophet forgave him and said, when Umar al-Khattab wanted to chop off his neck, "Oh Umar, maybe that Allah looked at the warriors of Badr, the Badr battle, and said, do whatever you like, I have forgiven you." And the man was obviously forgiven. And on the 10th of Ramadan, the Prophet went with his army, and when he departed from Medina at a certain length, it was Ramadan, so he broke his fast, because then he became a traveler after a certain distance, and he broke his fast then. Quraysh took news. Abu Sufyan came back, mounted behind Al-Abbas ibn Abdul Muttalib, the uncle of the Prophet, on the Baghla, the mule of the Prophet, in hiding, and wanted to see the Prophet. Omar saw him and wanted to kill him, but Al-Abbas took him to the Prophet, and then Abu Sufyan accepted Islam, became a Muslim. And he was told, go back to Quraysh then and tell them about the power we have and our army. They let him see the army and the divisions of the army and the fires of the army at night. It was something that was absolutely shocking to him. And then Al-Abbas said, O Prophet of Allah, you know Abu Sufyan is the boss of his people. He is a man with pride. Can you offer him some courtesy? And the Prophet told him, go to Mecca and tell them, whoever enters in the mosque is safe. Whoever locks his door and stays inside his house is safe. And whoever enters the house of Abu Sufyan is safe. And this was very courteous on part of the Prophet. Then a man saw the Prophet and felt awed by the Prophet, and the Prophet was very modest. He said, take it easy. I am just the son of a woman from Quraysh who used to eat dry bread. And the Prophet gave orders not to fight unless attacked. And so the three prongs of the army went into Mecca. Only little skirmishes in the way of Khalid ibn al-Walid that were very easy to deal with. And then the Prophet went back, no resistance, and he went into around the Kaaba, and he bowed his head in gratitude to Allah and in modesty, and he went around hitting the idols with his stick, and the idols were destroyed. And the Quran came, جاء الحق وزهق الباطل إن الباطل كان زهوقا. The truth has come, the falsity has gone. Falsities do not endure. And came the people of Quraysh to him. He is the new conqueror, and he said, what do you think I'm doing with you, the long-time enemies? And they said, you will do good to us. You are a good brother and a good nephew. And he said, well, go, you are a free people. And that was the general amnesty the Prophet gave. Sometimes, and this is one of my personal secrets, when the revolution at Iran came and was successful, I rejoiced. I didn't like the ruling of the Shah, and I said, well, it has been a long time since Muslims could make their point and could win a victory. But at that time I prayed to Allah to inspire the revolution to declare an amnesty. This is a new day, this is a new future. We're starting a new page. It will be Islam. If you are uncomfortable, goodbye and go away. You stay, you are safe. Because you can demolish a system by hatred, but you can never build a system on hatred. You can build only on love. And this was missed, and it is something which I still am sorry for until these days. Anyhow, the Prophet gave them general amnesty, and they all, except the very few, became Muslim. and there was no killing except for the execution of 8 people who were sentenced to death even before the Prophet came. The sentence was uttered, and he said, those 8 people will be killed, otherwise do not kill. During that Fath, certain juridical rules were laid down. The Prophet broke his fast and said his prayers qasr, that is, shortening the prayers. The four would be 2 rak'ahs in Mecca. Although Mecca was his home, but it was not his residence. And therefore he considered himself a traveler in Mecca. If I go to my home in Cairo, because I'm spending a vacation, it is not my permanent residence. And therefore the Prophet did not fast and shortened the prayers. He also decreed that the whole area of Mecca and around Mecca was the sacred area. The rules between inheritance between a Muslim and a Kafir. It so happened that the Prophet and Ali ibn Abi Talib had a home, but when the father died, because Ali was a Muslim and went to Medina, his brother Aqil stayed in Mecca because he was a Kafir, and he inherited the home. And the Prophet wouldn't take the home, and Ali wouldn't take the home, because the Prophet said his hadith, لا يتوارث ملتين. When people of different religions would not be the inheritors of each other. Another thing is al-waladu lil-firash. There is a family, a married couple, there is a baby. Someone else comes and claims the baby. It's my baby. I committed adultery with the woman and this is my baby. The ruling was the baby is the baby of the family, of the husband and the wife, not of the intruder, even if it was really his baby. Then again in the Fath there was a repetition of the ban on the mut'ah. To spend on your wife was decreed that the one responsible for the upkeep of the family is the husband. And we remember that when women went for bay'ah, and the wife of Abu Sufyan, who was responsible for the killing of Hamza, the uncle of the Prophet, yet she comes as a Muslim giving the pledge. And she said, tell me, Prophet, suppose I take from the money of Abu Sufyan because he's not such a generous man. And the Prophet said, yes, it is your right to take what suffices you. And from then on it became the Islamic rule that it is the wife who would be the breadwinner of the family. And so when a family is formed and a man marries a woman, he spends by legal obligation. She might contribute by ethical obligation, but not by legal obligation. The one responsible for the upkeep of the family is the husband. Then, لا هجرة بعد الفتح. From that day on, the hijrah was the hijrah from Mecca to Medina. But now we took Mecca. So somebody leaving from Mecca to Medina, it is not a hijrah, and yet the Prophet said, Al-hijratu madiyatun ila yawm al-qiyamah, be a hijrah until the day of judgment, meaning the hijrah from bad to good, from oppression to where Islam can be better lived or better served. And this was the conquest of Mecca, the great victory, and after that there was yet to come another major battle of a different nature, but this you will hear in the coming class, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
I know from the past Jesus, but I didn't know that Jews expected to.
No, the Jews didn't expect Jesus because to them Jesus was a liar and an impostor. The Jews expected the Messiah.
Yeah, that's what
Yes.
But they didn't expect.
Yes. So they were expected someone to be sent. And as the Negus of Abyssinia said, the glad tidings of the one coming riding a donkey are the same as the glad tidings on the one coming riding a camel, alluding to Jesus riding a donkey and to Muhammad riding the camel. And yes, the Jews were expecting someone. Some of the features were in the Torah, which was subject to variation and delay. And they even took pride over the Arabs of Medina before they became Muslims. They always said, we are better than you because we have a book and we are going to have a prophet sent to us, a Messiah, a prophet. And of course the Medina people were idolaters. And always they had that complex that the Jews are better than us. They are expecting a new messenger. Yes?
Yes. You said after the Fed, they were aiming for the Quran.
Yes.
Why were they?
For assaults against Muslims with various charges. They didn't all do the same thing, but they committed various crimes, and each on his own was sentenced to death. I cannot recall now the specific charges for each of them.